questions. There's some questions related to like students who are undecided. What are some things that we could do to help maybe students figure out what they want to do?
So, I mean, first of all, I just want to voice that I think students who are undecided it would probably be beneficial for them to explore attending a liberal arts college if that's something that they're comfortable with.
Mm.
Many colleges, including larger universities that have an undergraduate division, are like, we're a liberal arts college, but I'm specifically speaking to colleges that are standalone liberal arts colleges. They don't have graduate programs, they don't have PhD programs. Those colleges tend to really emphasize teaching, and they are kind of like the hub for the undecided student, because at most of them, you have until the end of your second year of college to change your major and dabble. And I'd say at even the more highly selective liberal arts colleges, places like Pomona, there is a little bit more of, I'd say, an emphasis and an increasing desire for students who have more of a sense of what they want to do. But I would argue that compared to especially larger universities, especially public flagship schools that maybe have different admission processes and impacted majors and things like that, being undecided in that particular application round can be a little more difficult when there is a little more pressure on some of those larger schools to have more of that academic interest alignment be a part of their admission process. Liberal arts colleges, it is less, I'd say, of an intense aspect of the way that colleges review applications. So just want to voice that you being undecided is not a bad thing. What you want to avoid being is apathetic. And what I mean by that is that I've definitely read applications from students who are like, they're undecided and they're like, hey, I'm undecided, but here's the areas where I'm gravitating towards. Here's how I spent my time. Here's what I'm thinking are my skills in action where I feel the most empowered. And that's the type of messaging that as someone in admissions wants to see. They want to see that you've done some reflection on how your gifts and talents can be channeled and directed towards a certain academic path or professional future. What they don't want to read is, I don't care what I major in. I haven't really thought much about it. I'll figure it out when I get there, or I'll major in whatever you want so that I can go to your college. That is not a very empowering message and gives the admission officer little to no material to advocate for you. So in terms of how you can help students who are undecided, I'd say doing things like roles and identities exercises, trying to kind of have some of those more like things like U Science or Futurescape or College Board's Big Future, any of those kind of like assessment tools that help students take stock of the skills and things that they're really good at and what industries and academic areas align better with those. That's a great starting point. And then ideally just more conversation and building a college list that matches their level of undecidedness so that they're not shooting themselves in the foot or putting their hat in the ring at places where there is a little bit more of an expectation of prior or of a sense of what you want to do. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. And just to add on a little bit more to that, students change their major all the time. So colleges know that going in that potentially a student is applying with an X major, but they're not going to necessarily graduate with it. But again, as Tom mentioned, like it's nice to have a direction or a sense of, where the student is thinking about heading towards rather than having like no clue at all.
Any other questions that stuck out to you, Jay, that you saw?
Um, There was a question about like how colleges view certain activities like robotics. Since it's a team, club, and competition, isn't it harder for students to stand out among crowds? And then also, is research considered an extracurricular activity? So yeah, research absolutely is considered a extracurricular activity. And in terms of like any school clubs, yes, maybe a lot of students may have it, but again, the level of involvement, what the student actually does within the club will vary from student to student. Sometimes if the student is just a member, that might not be as impactful versus a student who takes a lead or is part of a community or leads a group, maybe like does more of the design within robotics or goes to competition and is able to place at a high level at the maybe national or international level. Those are ways to kind of make a more common activity more impactful or more meaningful.
I saw two questions, one from K Bell, which is about NCL, which I believe is National Charity League. I didn't look it up, but that's from the context that I'm reading it. So in kind of the concern that, K Bell is voicing is like, will it be seen as kind of privileged for a student to be volunteering through like a formal organization like that? And I wouldn't argue that someone in admissions is going to negatively look at a student spending their time helping other people, whether it's through a formal or informal opportunity. Ideally, what I think that they're wanting to see is that that's not the only way, I guess, that you show that you're a good person. Because there's a lot of students who this is a very good way to, I'd say, be introduced to justice issues, to communities that are experiencing poverty, to causes and challenges in our society. And ideally, kind of as you saw maybe in some of the themes of the examples that we gave, students were introduced to something in ninth or 10th grade, maybe through a formal volunteer opportunity. And then typically the students who, again, who are applying to maybe more selective schools are taking action beyond that. So I guess it's not that I would say that that is a bad way to be spending your time, but ideally I think they want to see students reflecting on, okay, I'm noticing and I'm engaging in an issue through a formal opportunity like National Charity League. And now how can I kind of take it one step further with my own time and energy of my own fruition with my skills, talents in mind? So that's a good question to have your student reflect on. There was another question that I saw that was related to, oh, now I'm like blanking on it. Oh, political climate. Okay, this is a really good one. So an anonymous attendee asked, given the current political climate and actions taken against certain universities, should your student downplay or discontinue activities that show that they are an activist or doing research in certain areas like climate science, environmental engineering, or certain cultural gender studies? Will college admissions see these kind of activities as negative? This is a really good question, and one that it's a little, I'd say, like too soon to know exactly how, from a formal application reading process, this is going to impact students' admission cycle. My sense, and something that, for example, the president of Mount Holyoke College, it's a liberal arts college in Massachusetts. It's a historically women's college. She kind of went out and said, hey, if you're aligning your admission process and policies with your institutional mission, and these are things that you value, nothing should really change in terms of your process when it comes to the way that you're evaluating students. And from a legal perspective, that does hold in court. And I know this because of the Supreme Court decision on race conscious admission. And also when I was working at Pomona, we were changing our admission reading process to potentially account for that potential decision that we were seeing maybe unfolding and foreshadowing in the near future. So I was there from 2017 to 2021. And in that process, we did make a lot of changes to our reading rubric and process and had to be closely aligned with our foundational documents as a college, our mission statements, our value statements. So if colleges have historical precedent and kind of things in terms of their, I guess, infrastructure as a school and the way that who they serve, the types of students that they want to have on their campus, if that ties to students solving big issues in our world, like climate science, environmental engineering, if you look at any mission statement, a lot of colleges have that. It's going to be hard for any legislative body to not allow that to hold fruit. I am not a lawyer. I am not a legal expert, but that is my sense of kind of the way that colleges will interpret those activities. And also, the student will land at the college that's going to support them best, that admits them based on the information that they provide that is true and genuine. So if a college does not, I would say it's going to be more statistically rare that colleges are going to be dinging students for these types of things, regardless of political outcomes or decisions. And then I would encourage students to really be honest with the way that they spend their time and what motivates them, and it will translate with the colleges that are wanting to go the extra mile to support them.
Mm-hmm. There's also a parent who's an immigrant who's just wondering how the holistic approach works. So, in many different countries, a student, in order to get into university, they'll take a test, or it's a combination of their grade, the high school grades plus a test that gets them into a college, or doesn't. But many of the more selective colleges in America use a holistic approach, meaning they will consider both the academics of a student, so their test score, their school grades, their performances, in academic subjects, as well as their extracurriculars, which come in many different forms. It comes in the form of the activities list, their college essays, their interview, and some of the things that we talked about are colleges looking for things like character, how who the student is, and to kind of make a determination, if the university wants to take that student out based on all of that combined information. So that's what holistic means is they're taking all the information that's provided to them to make a decision versus not just, if a student hits a student score, they get in, or if they don't hit a certain school, they're not in. In the holistic approach, even if a student doesn't quite meet the academic norms or averages that the university typically emits, if they have certain qualities that the university, really likes, they could still be admitted, and vice versa. If a student, even with a perfect GPA, a perfect test score, perfect academics, if they lack certain qualities or activities, they could be denied from getting in.
I saw two questions I thought were really good that I'll answer live. One was about do you have any examples of students who do particular initiatives with fine art, design, etc., that have benefited a large group of people?
Mhm.
Um, I do. So actually, I worked previously with a student when I was working on the high school side as a college counselor. One of the students that was on my caseload was very passionate about body positivity art, in particular because she had psoriasis. She struggled with that. She was a really talented visual artist, both in terms of painting, but also a lot of digital art was kind of her medium of choice. And so she started to create this Instagram that, she started to learn about, hashtags, how to kind of course, that's like an old now TikTok and the algorithm, it's all like so different. And so definitely looking into how to gain a following and traction in today's social media climate is a good thing to research. But she was really excited about posting her art on this account and getting more and more people and collaborating with more individuals who were also celebrating body positivity in their art. So she collaborated with lots of local artists, even people that she met online through her social media account. She ended up accruing pretty substantial following, and it doesn't mean she had millions of followers. Again, sometimes students are like, because in their minds, it's like, to be a success, you have to have like millions of subscribers. No, no, no. People in college admissions, they're impressed by like 5,000. Like, they just want to see that you're putting your stuff out there and you're getting people talking about something that you are representing in your art. So she ended up being admitted actually to a really, really neat program that combines it's called the Jimmy Young Iovine School of like Innovation. It's at University of Southern California,
USC.
USC, and it combines art and design with kind of business and tech. So that part of her background and her experience was a big piece of, I believe, why she was admitted to that program.
Yeah.
Um,
I have an
and
example too of a student who, she took art classes her entire life, super passionate about art, but realizes, not every student can afford these expensive art classes at an art studio. So what she did is over the summer, she got donations from her art studio, from her peers, for art supplies. And she essentially like taught a summer course for students who couldn't afford art classes, opportunities to learn, about oil painting, about sketching. So she designed a whole like summer curriculum on her own, and provided all the supplies, and she made that into like an annual thing. And by the second year, I think she got another friend of hers who was also interested to join her and made it a little bit bigger too. So that's kind of the impact and the growth that we talked about in our presentation. So,
sorry, I was unmuting myself. Tina Young was asking, uh, what are places where students can talk about some of these longer like areas of initiative and impact in their application, since the activities list character limit on the common application is so small. I think right now it's 150 characters per activity. Um, a lot of times students will reflect more on that in their additional information section. That has been reduced this year from 650 characters to 300 characters. So just be aware of that. Some individual colleges will allow you to submit a resume or another supplemental document after you apply to the college. A lot of times they'll actually let you submit things, maybe a portfolio, something. That's another place. Creating a website doesn't have to be anything sophisticated. It can be a simple Google site, Squarespace, anything free site, kind of documenting the project and sharing a link about that in your application, and or communicating the project with your teachers and counselors at your school, so that way they can cover it and mention it in their recommendation letters. So that way that school support, like we saw with Jerry and that application example from Stanford, that's being corroborated by now people on the school end about that, particular initiative. This is
Yeah.
a question I think it's probably a good one for us to leave on just for the sake of time. And it's essentially along the lines of, part of me really admires all of this initiative and drive. And also, I just know so many wonderful teens who aren't demonstrating this kind of initiative with a ton of adult scaffolding. Can you speak to this? Do you think there are over scaffolding our teens in order to create projects that seem more in line with kids, with projects that people in college are doing? This is a great question, and one that I want to really reiterate that hopefully a key takeaway, what you gathered from this presentation, is that a lot of the projects that we're spotlighting are students who are aiming for more of a selective college admission process. This is not the bar that every high school student needs to be reaching to go to college at all. We're speaking to a process that tends to be more choosy, where there are far more qualified applicants academically than the college can take on. So they look to things like students who are taking on more initiative when they're making these admissions decisions. So a big piece of this is your college list and setting expectations around, am I reaching the bar of initiative and impact that these more selective colleges are looking for? You can apply
Mhm.
anywhere you want. I never tell a student, don't apply somewhere. I will tell them, from my experience, their chances of being admitted, and I will give them context and information about, here are past experiences with students who've been admitted that we know of, anecdotally from previous jobs, from our time working in admissions, from our current students. But that doesn't mean that you have to apply to those places. You can if you want to, and I'm going to support you. But just know that these are kind of some of the levels of extracurricular, I guess, amplification that is seen on that more selective end. So again, kind of like Jay was mentioning with the computer science and tech, like there are amazing colleges out there, like the Worcester Polytechnic Institutes, Colorado School of Mines, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. These are all institutes of technology that want students talented in computer science engineering, that have those advanced math classes, who've reached calculus. They're going to be admitting students who are involved in those more common STEM extracurriculars, right? So that's just, I think, a question that you as a student and family need to ask yourself is, where do I want to apply? How can I align my high school experience to make myself as competitive as possible? And what does a final college look like that is a realistic measure of the academic prowess that I represent, as well as kind of some of the out of school things that I spent my time doing?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Any final words? Oh, actually, there's one last question I wanted to answer real quick. Is about, what about time spent in competitions prep? Jay, I'd be curious to hear your question on your answer to this, because I have my own answer, but I want to hear from you first on like math competitions, science competitions, that kind of circuit or world that many students kind of get
Mhm.
involved in high school.
Yeah, so from my experience, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, where if a student isn't putting enough time for preparation for these competitions, they're not going to make it to a high enough level for it to actually make an impact on your application. Like they're not at the national or international level. But then the opposite of that is, because they're spending so much time on these competitions, they don't have a lot of other extracurricular activities that demonstrate their leaderships and their initiatives, like some of these other qualities that colleges are caring about. So I think it's really that balance, and early identifying like where are the areas that I can be successful at. And then if a student is not able to, I would say, place in a certain area, then maybe the student should look into other activities or other areas to explore their interests. Because again, like if a student isn't able to make it at a high level for certain competitions, for some of the more selective colleges, that might not make a big enough impact, because maybe, like for example, like MIT, they're looking at like math Olympiad finalists. So if you're not quite at that level, then the reach for MIT might be a little bit harder. So yeah, that's kind of my opinion is, either spend more time on it, make sure you do well on them, or maybe direct some of that energy and attention into other activities.
Yeah, my answer is pretty consistent with Jay's. I found that there are many students who kind of get like addicted to leveling up in the competition world, and it ends up taking up so much of their time. And what they need to realize is that look around at how many people are doing these competitions. It's hundreds, thousands of people. So, yes, you are demonstrating your aptitude for a certain academic area. Competitions are not the only way to do that. And in fact, I'd say that sometimes I would argue that they can be some of the most time intensive ways, especially if you're not, as Jay mentioned, like naturally able to reach a certain level. I would argue that your application is going to be more distinctive, original, and you probably will be more engaged. Maybe not, because some students actually really like following structure and like
Mm-hmm.
studying towards a certain result. I would just say there's a lot more students who are following that path, and by doing so are all kind of feeling like a similar type of student when you're the one reading the application. Like
Yeah.
there's not as much kind of standing out because they're just doing what everyone else is doing. So I really want to encourage students and families to do that reflecting of, am I getting a little bit too tunnel visioned toward this
Mm-hmm.
particular area? And again, we mentioned 3 to 4 core activities, right? If you're in 2 things, it's math competitions and like one other club in school, it's probably a sign that you are over specializing and pointing yourself down something that is um, very familiar to people in college admissions. So something to think about. All right. Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you to Rebecca for hanging out a little longer for this Q&A. We'll go ahead and stop the recording there. And thank you for all of us, all of you who stayed on the call. I'll go ahead and just drop the link in the chat one more time if there are any late attendees for the college admission or the college counseling, scheduling a call, connecting with our team about our one-on-one application support and college counseling. But thanks for your participation. We hope this was helpful and gave you some good food for thought. And you'll get the recording and slides tomorrow or in the near future. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.